Every monument hides a story. Every stone whispers a past. Welcome to History Vault, where history comes alive. In the midst of New York Harbor, she rises above the waves like a vision, her torch cutting through fog and history alike. But the Statue of Liberty is more than a monument of stone and metal. She is a riddle carved in copper, a gift from one nation to another, yet claimed by the entire world. Some see her as hope, others as irony, and many as prophecy. Behind her serene gaze lies a story of revolutions, forgotten struggles, and a timeless human hunger for freedom. In the heart of the 19th century, when nations were redefining themselves and empires were giving way to new ideals, a French statesman named Edouard René de Laboulaye began to dream of a symbol that would honor freedom itself. To him, the young United States was more than just another country. It was a living experiment of democracy. If America could endure, then liberty as an idea might truly flourish. From this vision grew the seed of a gift, not merely of stone and metal, but of values and ideals. That seed was planted in the mind of the sculptor, Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, a man whose art had already been inspired by colossal monuments of antiquity. He envisioned something vast, something awe-inspiring, a modern colossus that would rise not in the ruins of an empire, but in the harbor of a young and hopeful nation. Bartholdi's imagination took form in the figure of a robed woman, majestic and timeless, carrying a torch high into the sky. She would not be a goddess of war or empire, but a guardian of liberty, holding a beacon to light the way for generations yet to come. This woman of copper and steel would embody freedom itself, a gift from the people of France to the people of America to celebrate the centennial of independence and to remind the world that liberty must be cherished, defended, and shared. The journey from vision to reality, however, was far from simple. France in the 1870s was itself wrestling with political upheaval and financial troubles. Raising the funds for such a monumental work was daunting. Public lotteries were organized, donations were gathered, and events were staged to rally support. Across the Atlantic, Americans were asked to provide for the pedestal upon which the statue would stand. But enthusiasm was uneven at first. Many doubted whether such an ambitious project could succeed. Yet the idea carried with it an irresistible energy. This was not just art, nor merely architecture. It was a symbol that tied two nations together across an ocean. In France, workshops rang with the sound of hammering as Bartholdi and his team began assembling the statue piece by piece. Sheets of copper were carefully shaped, riveted, and bent into place. The internal skeleton that would hold this immense creation was entrusted to Gustave Eiffel, the engineer whose genius for iron frameworks would later bring the Eiffel Tower to life. Together, sculptor and engineer crafted something unprecedented, a statue that was both colossal and enduring, able to withstand the elements of the sea and the storms of time. As the years passed, the statue grew. First a hand and torch were completed and sent to America, where they were displayed at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876, a tantalizing preview of what was to come. Visitors marveled at its scale, and gradually, support for the project gained momentum. In New York, newspaper magnate Joseph Pulitzer launched a campaign in his paper, urging citizens to contribute whatever they could, from pennies to dollars, to build a pedestal. He promised that every donor's name, no matter how small the gift, would be printed in the paper. The campaign worked, igniting a sense of ownership among ordinary Americans who now felt they were part of the statue story. By 1885, after nearly a decade of effort, the statue was complete in France. But moving such a colossal figure across the Atlantic was itself an epic feat piece by piece. It was carefully disassembled into over 300 sections, packed into crates, and loaded onto French frigate Isère. That summer, the ship crossed the ocean and entered New York Harbor, carrying not just tons of copper and steel, but the hopes of two nations bound together by shared ideals. When the crates were opened and the pieces lifted onto the soil of Bedloe's Island, later renamed Liberty Island, workers began the painstaking task of reassembling the giant. Slowly, the figure rose against the skyline of New York. Her feet, shackles broken, were set upon the pedestal, her robes unfurled. Her torch reached once more for the sky. And though the work of bolting her copper skin to Eiffel's iron skeleton was slow and arduous, each day she grew taller, more commanding, until she seemed to embody the very horizon. Finally, in October of 1886, the statue was complete. She stood more than 300 feet above the waters of the harbor, her gaze fixed eastward, as though looking back across the ocean toward France, the land of her birth. When the veil was lifted during her dedication, thousands gathered to witness the moment. Cannons roared, ships sounded their horns, and cheers filled the air. It was not only the dedication of a monument, but the unveiling of an icon destined to stand for centuries. Behind her silent gaze lay a story of struggle, cooperation, and determination, a symbol born in the imagination of one man, supported by the efforts of countless citizens on both sides of the Atlantic, had now taken physical form. Yet there was something mysterious about her, too, something almost prophetic. She seemed more than a gift of friendship between two nations. She seemed to carry a message to the world, a warning that liberty, once kindled, must be protected, and a promise that even in the darkest of times, the torch would not be extinguished. As ships passed into New York Harbor, sailors and immigrants alike would look upon her with wonder. To some she was simply a colossal statue, to others a guardian of dreams, but to all she was unforgettable. The story of her creation, the whispers of Laboulaye, the vision of Bartholdi, the genius of Eiffel, the pennies of school children, and the sacrifices of laborers, had fused into something greater than any individual. She was liberty itself, carved not from stone, but from the faith of those who believed that freedom should shine like a beacon for all the world to see. When the sculptor Frederick Auguste Bartholdi first envisioned the great statue, he did not simply want to create a figure of a woman holding a torch. His imagination was far grander, rooted in the ancient wonders of the world, the colossal forms that once dominated cities and harbors, and he sought to revive that lost tradition for a modern age. The Statue of Liberty was not only a gift of diplomacy, but a riddle of symbolism, a figure layered with meaning, where every fold of the robe, every angle of the face, and every element of her posture whispered a story. Her design was a fusion of myth, history, and idealism. Bartholdi's model was inspired in part by classical goddesses, Libertas, the Roman personification of liberty, and perhaps even Ishtar of the ancient Mesopotamians, a reminder that freedom was a concept that reached back into humanity's oldest civilizations. Yet she was not meant to be divine. She was meant to be human, approachable, with a face solemn but calm, gazing into eternity as though watching over the world. Her crown bore 7 rays, stretching outward like beams of the sun, meant to symbolize the 7 seas and the 7 continents, a quiet declaration that liberty was not confined to one nation, but belonged to all of humanity. Her torch was the most obvious symbol, a flame held aloft to light the path forward. But even this was more than simple fire. It represented enlightenment, knowledge piercing the darkness, a promise that liberty thrives where ignorance is banished. And at her feet, often overlooked by casual visitors, lay broken shackles and chains. They are half hidden beneath her robes, yet their presence is powerful, an eternal reminder that freedom is born from struggle, that oppression must be shattered for liberty to rise. In that small detail, she carried the weight of revolutions, uprisings, and the untold sacrifices of those who dared to dream of freedom. Yet symbolism alone could not lift copper sheets into the sky. The statue was not just art, it was an engineering marvel. To create a figure that would rise taller than any statue before, and have it endure the fierce winds of New York Harbor, required an innovation unlike anything attempted in sculpture. For this task, Bartholdi turned to Gustave Eiffel, the engineer who would later become famous for his tower in Paris. Eiffel conceived an internal skeleton of wrought iron, a hidden latticework that would support the statue's copper skin. Instead of being solid, Liberty would be a hollow giant, her copper shell only a few millimeters thick, yet her weight distributed across an iron framework that allowed her to flex with the wind like a living thing. This design was radical for its time. Traditional statues were carved from stone or cast from solid metal, but Liberty was something new, a fusion of architecture and sculpture. Over 300 copper sheets were hammered into shape using repoussé, a technique as ancient as the artisans of Greece and Rome, yet now magnified to a scale the world had never seen. Each panel was molded carefully, then riveted into place, until piece by piece, her form emerged. The stern yet gentle face, the flowing robe, the graceful arms stretching upward to the torch. When the statue stood complete, she was immense. From the base of her pedestal to the tip of her torch, she rose more than 300 feet, towering above the harbor. Her face alone measured over 8 feet high, her nose longer than the height of a grown man, her arms massive, yet so proportioned that from a distance she appeared serene and balanced. At night, when the torch was illuminated, she became a beacon in the truest sense, a silent guardian glowing against the darkness. But her design carried mysteries, too, ones that scholars and dreamers have pondered for generations. Some saw in her face the features of Bartholdi's own mother, giving the statue a deeply personal layer. Others argued she was modeled after ancient figures of wisdom and justice, echoing civilizations that had risen and fallen long before America was born. Her very name, Liberty Enlightening the World, sounded less like a monument and more like a prophecy, a vision that freedom would radiate outward from this harbor to touch every shore. Even her location was symbolic. Set at the entrance to New York Harbor, she was placed where ships from around the world would first glimpse her towering form. For immigrants arriving after long, perilous journeys, she was the first sight of America. To them, she was not just copper and iron. She was hope made visible. The design, the symbolism, and the engineering came together not simply to honor freedom, but to give freedom a face, a body, a presence that could not be ignored. As the years passed, her meaning deepened. Wars raged, nations rose and fell, yet liberty remained. Her gaze unchanged, her torch unquenched. The artistry of Bartholdi and the ingenuity of Eiffel had created not just a statue, but a symbol so powerful it transcended politics and borders. She became a paradox, silent yet speaking volumes, still yet guiding millions, rooted in one place yet belonging to the entire world. The Statue of Liberty's design was, in truth, a puzzle of history, myth, and engineering woven together. She was a colossal riddle standing in the harbor, her meaning shifting slightly depending on who looked at her. To some, she was France's gift to America. To others, she was the world's gift to humanity. And to all who approached her, whether on great ocean liners or small boats carrying desperate souls, she was a promise, an oath carved in copper and iron, that liberty was real and that its light would forever shine. When the colossal figure of liberty left the workshops of France, she was not yet the towering monument that people know today. She was broken into more than 300 pieces, carefully packed into crates like fragments of some ancient relic. In 1885, these crates were loaded onto the French frigate Isère, a ship that would carry not just a gift, but a message across the Atlantic. The journey itself felt symbolic, a goddess of freedom dismantled, waiting to be reborn in a new land. The ship's hold was filled with her copper skin, her iron bones, her immense face, her torch, her crown, each hidden away in silence as though she were sleeping, waiting for her awakening in America. When Isère finally sailed into New York Harbor, the anticipation was electric. Crowds lined the shore, newspapers buzzed with excitement, and ships blew their whistles in salute. The very waters of the harbor seemed to come alive with energy. America, still young but already a land of contradictions and struggles, was about to receive a symbol that would redefine its identity. The crates were unloaded onto Bedloe's Island, a rocky outcrop that would soon become sacred ground. Piece by piece, liberty began to rise, her form slowly reassembled like a puzzle that had traveled across an ocean. Her pedestal was already waiting, a massive granite foundation funded not by the wealthy elite alone, but by ordinary citizens who gave what they could. Some donated pennies, others nickels, and school children emptied small jars of coins, each contribution an act of faith in what the statue represented. Joseph Pulitzer, the famous publisher, had even launched a campaign urging everyday Americans to contribute, turning the statue into not just a gift from France, but a monument built by the people of America themselves. It was a story of shared sacrifice, a blending of nations, and a reminder that freedom was not gifted lightly. It had to be claimed, supported, and built piece by piece. As the construction advanced, the iron skeleton designed by Gustave Eiffel was erected, rising like the frame of some futuristic cathedral. Onto this structure, workers riveted the massive copper sheets, carefully shaping them to create the flowing robes, the stern yet serene face, and the torch lifted high. Day by day, liberty emerged, her copper skin glowing like fire under the sun. From a distance, It must have looked as though a giant was materializing out of the earth, her form born from stone, iron, and human will. By 1886, she stood complete, a colossal figure towering over the harbor. On October 28th, the day of her dedication, New York City erupted in celebration. Hundreds of thousands gathered, their cheers echoing across the waters. It was more than a ceremony. It was a moment of history unfolding before their eyes. President Grover Cleveland presided over the event, his voice carrying across the vast crowd as he proclaimed that liberty enlightening the world now belonged not just to New York, not just to America, but to all people seeking freedom. The dedication was marked by a parade unlike anything the city had ever seen. Ships crowded the harbor, draped in flags, their horns and cannons firing in salute. On land, a procession of soldiers, statesmen, and ordinary citizens marched through streets that rang with ticker tape, a celebration so grand it was later remembered as the first ticker tape parade in history. For the immigrants who had already begun arriving in waves through Castle Garden and later Ellis Island, the sight of liberty rising above the harbor must have felt like a dream. Many of them did not understand English, but they did not need to. The statue spoke a universal language. Yet even amidst the celebration, there was mystery. Some asked why the statue was a woman, why she bore the face she did, and why she gazed outward rather than downward toward the city she guarded. Others whispered the broken chains at her feet, hidden from view, and wondered if they carried a deeper message about slavery, which had ended only 2 decades earlier. To the crowds that day, liberty was both familiar and strange, majestic yet enigmatic, her meaning shifting depending on the eyes that looked upon her. As night fell, and the statue stood illuminated against the sky, the torch blazing with light, there must have been a hush that swept across the harbor. It was not simply the unveiling of a monument. It was a consecration of an idea. France had given the statue as a gesture of friendship, but on that night, liberty transcended diplomacy. She became something larger, something eternal, a guardian at the gates of America, a silent watcher whose flame promised to guide the lost, the weary, and the hopeful. The dedication ceremony ended, but her story was just beginning. Over the years that followed, countless ships passed beneath her gaze. Immigrants traveling across oceans, often leaving behind everything they had ever known, would see her form rising in the distance and feel a surge of hope. For them, liberty was not copper or iron. She was flesh and spirit, a mother welcoming them to a new home. The harbor became a threshold between the old world and the new, and the statue stood as its eternal sentinel. The day of her arrival and dedication remains one of the great turning points in American history. The broken pieces carried across the ocean had become whole, and in that transformation, the nation itself was transformed. From that moment on, the Statue of Liberty was more than a monument. It was a promise carved in copper and fire, a promise that continues to echo across time, reminding every generation that liberty, once awakened, must never sleep again. They came in waves, millions of them, each carrying a story written in hunger, in hope, in desperation, in courage. The Atlantic became the road of dreams, and on that road traveled men, women, and children who left behind villages, towns, and entire homelands to chase the unknown. Their ships, often crowded and heavy with the weight of human longing, drifted toward the same destination, New York Harbor. And there, before they saw the city, before they set foot on American soil, they saw her, rising out of the water like a guardian. The Statue of Liberty greeted them not with words, but with silence, a silence that thundered louder than any speech. Her torch, even when dimmed by mist or storm, seemed to burn in their hearts. For many, this was not just a statue of copper and steel. It was the first face of America. The immigrants came from Italy and Ireland, from Poland and Germany, from Russia, Greece, and beyond. Some fled famine, some fled wars, others escaped persecution, and many simply sought the chance to live a life unchained by the poverty of the old world. Their ships docked at Ellis Island, a name that would become etched into history as the gateway to America. But Ellis was not just a gateway. It was a place of trials, of questions, of examinations. Doctors peered into the eyes of newcomers, checked for signs of illness, and officials scribbled names into massive books. To some, Ellis Island was the first taste of hope fulfilled. To others, it was a heartbreak of rejection. Families were split, Names were changed, and lives were rewritten in the cramped halls of that processing station. And through it all, Liberty watched. Standing just across the water, she became the symbol not only of arrival but of acceptance. Imagine an Italian farmer, hands blistered from years of labor, stepping onto the deck of his ship as it entered the harbor. Imagine the tears in the eyes of a Jewish mother clutching her child as she whispered that the giant woman with the torch meant they had reached safety. For the Irish laborer, scarred by famine and hardship, the statue was no mere sculpture. It was a miracle, proof that survival had led them to a place where a new beginning could unfold. The chains at her feet, half buried and almost hidden, carried a message that many immigrants understood even if they had never studied her design. She stood against tyranny, against bondage, against the weight of oppression, for those who had escaped kings, empires, and rulers who treated them as little more than property. The statue was the first sign that they had entered a land where a different destiny was possible. Whether that promise would always be fulfilled was another story, but in that moment of arrival, the promise was everything. The sound of Ellis Island was unlike anything else. Hundreds of languages colliding, footsteps echoing in great halls, children crying, inspectors shouting names that were often mispronounced or shortened. Some immigrants left the island with a new identity, their old names cut down to fit the American tongue. Others left with nothing at all, forced to return to the old world. Yet, the ones who passed through and boarded ferries toward the city carried with them a memory they would never forget. The towering figure of Liberty fading into the distance as they sailed into a life they could barely imagine. For decades, Ellis Island processed millions of immigrants, each of them leaving a trace behind. Stories etched into the walls, names recorded in ledgers, dreams carried into the streets of New York. Together, they built the fabric of America. The factories, the railroads, the neighborhoods that would swell with laughter, music, and struggle. The Statue of Liberty, meanwhile, became the mother of exiles. She was no longer just a gift from France or a monument of copper. She was the embodiment of a myth that fed itself generation after generation, that America was a place where the tired, the poor, the huddled masses could breathe free. And yet, there was always a mystery. Did every immigrant truly find liberty? Did every dreamer who passed beneath her torch reach the promise she seemed to hold? The reality was harsher. Sweatshops consumed the labor of children. Ghettos trapped families in cycles of poverty. And discrimination followed many from the moment they set foot on the docks. Still, the image of liberty persisted, larger than the hardships, a vision that could not be extinguished. Perhaps it was this tension, the clash between dream and reality, that gave her power. She was not the symbol of a perfect nation, but of a nation striving, failing, and striving again. Generations later, descendants of those who first saw her torch still speak of the moment their ancestors described. The hush on deck, the whispers, the prayers, the rush of emotion when liberty first came into view. It was as if time froze in that instant, as though the ocean itself paused to allow the travelers a glimpse of their new destiny. That vision, repeated millions of times, carved itself into the collective memory of America. Liberty and Ellis Island became inseparable. One could not be mentioned without the other. Together they told the story of America's beginnings, of its contradictions, of its vast promise and its deep flaws. But above all, they told the story of human hope, of people willing to leave everything behind and journey into the unknown, because of a statue that stood tall in a harbor, torch raised high, whispering in silence. Here is the chance you seek. Here is freedom. Across the world, monuments rise from stone and steel, each carrying the weight of history, yet few have achieved the same resonance as the Statue of Liberty. She stands in New York Harbor, but her meaning has never been contained by a single city or even a single nation. From the moment her torch was first lit, she became more than copper and iron. She became a language that every culture could understand. Symbols do not speak in words. They whisper in images, in silence, in presence. And Liberty's image has traveled farther than any ship, echoed in revolutions, painted on posters, carried into the imaginations of millions who may never stand in her shadow. She was born in France, yet destined to embody America. But it is not just Americans who look at her with awe. To the world, she has come to signify something eternal, the unyielding desire for freedom. Across the 20th century, her image spread like wildfire, replicated on stamps, coins, propaganda, and art during the Second World War. She appeared in Allied posters, her torch blazing against the darkness of tyranny, a reminder that democracy itself was under siege. Soldiers carried photographs of her in their pockets, as if her light could guide them even on battlefields oceans away. But liberty has always lived in contradiction. For those who see her from afar, she is perfection, a goddess of freedom, untarnished and pure. Yet for those who live under her gaze, her message has been questioned. When civil rights leaders marched in the mid-20th century, they often invoked her torch, demanding that the liberty she represented shine, not just for some, but for all. Martin Luther King Jr. reminded America of the promissory note that liberty symbolized, one yet to be fully cashed by the descendants of slaves and the oppressed. The irony of a statue, gifted by a nation, celebrating freedom while millions within America still struggle for equality, gave her a dual face, a dream and a challenge. Globally, her image found new meanings. In the Cold War, for those trapped behind the Iron Curtain, she was not just an American monument. She was a beacon of longing. Dissidents in the Soviet Union spoke of her as though she were a mythic figure, watching from across the ocean. In Eastern Europe, when walls and barbed wire fell, murals of Statue of Liberty began to appear, painted by hands that had never seen her in person. To them, she was a dream of liberty incarnate, even as she stood on foreign soil. She also became a mirror in which nations saw themselves. In places where freedom was fragile, liberty was invoked as inspiration, a reminder that oppression could never fully extinguish the human spirit. Even in protests across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, replicas of her torch or her face would appear on banners, graffiti, and placards. She had become unmoored from her harbor, traveling into the consciousness of the world. And yet, there is a deeper mystery. Why did she resonate so widely? Why this statue, above all others, carried such a universal message? Part of it lies in her design. Unlike the stern, warlike monuments of empires past, liberty does not raise a sword, nor does she trample enemies beneath her feet. She stands with quiet strength, offering light rather than conquest. Her torch is not a weapon, but a guide. Her crown, with its 7 rays, reaches out in all directions, as if to say her message belongs to every continent, every ocean, every people. The broken chains at her feet, half hidden, whisper of liberation rather than domination. She is both grand and human, a colossus who does not terrify but reassures. In modern times, her legacy has only grown more layered. She appears in cinema, in novels, in music, often as both a symbol of hope and a warning. In apocalyptic films, her shadow remains stand as a haunting image of lost civilization. In comedies, she is parroted, her grandeur softened into familiarity. In countless songs, she is invoked as the emblem of America's promise and its struggles. Through it all, her symbolism adapts, refusing to be bound to a single narrative. To immigrants of the past, she was a promise. To civil rights marchers, she was a challenge. To freedom fighters abroad, she was a dream. To modern artists, she is a canvas. And to the millions who visit her today, she remains an enigma. Standing at her pedestal, one feels both humbled and empowered, as though touching something far larger than oneself. The sea breeze whips around her, the city skyline gleams behind her, and still she gazes outward, torch lifted, eyes fixed on the horizon. She does not look back at the city she protects. She looks forward, always outward, as though waiting for the next traveler, the next dreamer, the next generation to find courage in her light. Her legacy, then, is not carved into stone or copper alone. It is carved into the hearts of those who see her. Generations have passed since her unveiling, yet she still holds a spell over the imagination of the world. Perhaps that is her greatest mystery, that a statue, silent and still, has spoken louder across centuries than the voices of kings and conquerors. Her flame burns not just in the harbor, but in the minds of all who yearn for freedom. She endures because she is unfinished. Every age projects its own meaning onto her, reshaping her symbolism to fit its struggles and hopes. And as long as there are people seeking light in the darkness, her torch will never be extinguished. She has watched generations come and go, wars fought and peace declared, walls built and walls torn down. And still, she stands, torch raised, eyes fixed not on the past but on the horizon. The Statue of Liberty is not just America's guardian. She is humanity's reminder that the pursuit of freedom never ends. In her silence, she asks us the question that history itself cannot answer. What will we do with the light she holds? Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to History Vault, your gateway to the past.